The smallest boy collapsed first. His knees buckled on the frozen mud, hands clutching nothing but air, his breath coming in shallow gasps that barely stirred the frost on his lips. The other four surrounded him instantly, their faces gaunt, their eyes too large for their skulls, their bodies little more than bone wrapped in threadbare cloth. They had been walking for 3 days. No food, no shelter, no destination except away from the smoking ruins of what had been their home, away from the fever that took their parents, away from a town that had nothing left to give. And now, as the winter sun bled pale through the Colorado pines, they had nothing left either. The oldest brother, Thomas, barely 16, knelt beside the youngest. His voice cracked as he whispered promises he couldn't keep. Promises of warmth, of bread, of safety. But his hands shook as he tried to lift the boy, and his own legs threatened to give out. That's when the shadow fell across them, a figure massive and silent, blocking out what little light remained. Thomas looked up, his heart hammering, unsure if this was Jew or something worse. The man stood over 7 feet tall, shoulders broad as a barn door, hands like slabs of stone. His face was weathered, carved by years of sun and wind, but his eyes held something Thomas hadn't seen in weeks: kindness. The giant cowboy looked down at the 5 brothers, his jaw set, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice low and rumbling like distant thunder. 4 words that would change everything. You're coming with me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The eldest brother, Thomas Garrett, had stopped counting days. Time had become measured only in hunger pangs, and the weight of his younger brother's survival pressing against his chest like a stone. At 16, he was thrust into a role he never asked for: protector, provider, father to 4 boys who looked to him with eyes that expected miracles he couldn't deliver. The youngest, Samuel, was only 6. His face had hollowed in the weeks since their parents died, his cheeks sunken, his arms thin as kindling. Next came the twins, Daniel and Matthew, both 9 years old, mirror images of exhaustion and fear. Then there was Benjamin, 12, who tried to carry his share of the burden, but stumbled more with each passing mile. They had left the town of Silver Peak 3 days prior, though it felt like a lifetime. The fever had swept through like wildfire, taking their mother first, then their father 2 days later. The neighbors, those who survived, had their own sorrows to tend. There was no room for 5 orphaned boys, no food to spare, no charity left in hearts already wrung dry by loss. So Thomas made the only choice he could. He gathered his brothers in the dead of night, took what little they had: a tattered blanket, a rusted knife, a canteen with a slow leak, and led them east, toward the valley, where he'd heard tell of ranches that might need hands, towns that might show mercy. But mercy was a rare currency in 1887 Colorado, and the road offered none. The cold came first. November had arrived with teeth biting through their thin coats and settling into their bones. They huddled together at night beneath pines, Thomas wrapping his brothers in the single blanket while he sat watch, shivering so hard his jaw ached. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by Samuel's whimpering or the distant howl of wolves that seemed to draw closer each night. Hunger followed. The last of their bread had run out the first day. Thomas tried setting snares with frayed rope, but his hands shook too much, his mind too fogged by exhaustion to remember his father's teachings. They found berries once, bitter and small, and devoured them so quickly that Matthew vomited an hour later, doubling over in the snow while his brothers watched helplessly. By the 3rd day, they were ghosts drifting through a frozen world. Thomas's vision blurred at the edges. Benjamin had stopped speaking entirely, his face slack, his steps mechanical. The twins held each other upright, stumbling in tandem. And Samuel had simply stopped. Thomas dropped to his knees beside his youngest brother, his voice hoarse. "Sammy, get up, please, just a little further." But Samuel's eyes were glassy, unfocused. His lips moved without sound. Thomas gathered him in his arms, but his own strength had been spent miles ago. He looked at his other brothers, at Daniel's hollow stare, at Matthew's trembling hands, at Benjamin's defeated slump, and felt something break inside him. This was how it would end, not with violence or spectacle, but with quiet surrender on a frozen road that no one would remember. He lowered his head, pulling Samuel close, and waited for the cold to take them. That's when he heard it. Hooves, heavy and deliberate, crunching through snow. Thomas's head snapped up. Through the blur of exhaustion and gathering darkness, a figure emerged. A man on horseback, moving slowly down the trail. But this was no ordinary rider. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the man's size, the way he seemed to dwarf the massive draft horse beneath him. The horse stopped 10 feet away. The man dismounted and Thomas's breath caught. He was a giant. Not in the exaggerated way of campfire tales, but in the solid, undeniable reality of a man built on a scale that defied reason. His shoulders strained against a heavy sheepskin coat. His hands, as he removed his gloves, were broad and scarred, the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime wrestling the earth into submission. But it was his face that held Thomas's attention. Weathered, yes, with deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth. A thick beard, more grey than brown, covered his jaw, yet his eyes, pale blue, almost silver in the fading light, held a warmth that seemed impossible given the harshness of everything else about him. The giant studied the 5 boys, his gaze moving from one to the next, taking in their condition with a single sweeping glance. Thomas saw something flicker across that weathered face, recognition perhaps, or memory. When the man spoke, his voice was like rolling thunder, deep and resonant, but surprisingly gentle. "How long since you boys ate?" Thomas tried to answer, but his throat closed. He managed only a shake of his head. The giant nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth bundle. When he unwrapped it, Thomas saw bread, real bread, thick and dark, and strips of dried meat. "Here," the giant said, stepping forward. "Slow now. Your bellies won't take much at first." Thomas didn't move. Couldn't move. Suspicion warred with desperate hope. Men didn't give without taking. That's what the world had taught him. Yet this man knelt in the snow, breaking the bread into pieces, his massive hands moving with surprising delicacy. "It's all right, son," the giant said quietly, meeting Thomas's eyes. "No tricks, no price, just food." Something in that voice, the steadiness of it, the lack of pity or judgment, broke through Thomas's paralysis. He reached out with shaking hands and took the offered bread. The twins moved next, then Benjamin, all of them eating with the desperate carefulness of the starving. The giant watched, his expression unreadable. When Samuel still didn't move, the man knelt beside him, his huge frame somehow less intimidating at this angle. He broke off a small piece of bread and held it gently to the boy's lips. "Come on, little man," he murmured. "Just a bite." Samuel's eyes focused slightly. His mouth opened, accepting the bread. He chewed slowly, mechanically, but he chewed. Thomas felt tears sting his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Thank you, sir." The giant straightened, studying them all again with that same measuring gaze. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind through the pines and the quiet sounds of the boys eating. Finally, the man spoke, his tone matter-of-fact, as if what he was about to say was the most natural thing in the world. "You boys got people. Somewhere you're headed?" Thomas swallowed hard. "No, sir, nobody." The giant nodded slowly. He looked at the darkening sky, at the snow beginning to fall again, at 5 boys who wouldn't survive another night in the open. Thomas saw the decision form behind those pale eyes, not a moment of deliberation, but a certainty that seemed to have been there all along. The massive man stepped forward, his shadow falling across them like a shelter against the gathering storm. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of an unbreakable promise. "You're coming with me." 4 words, simple, direct, yet they hung in the frozen air like a lifeline thrown across an abyss. Thomas stared up at the giant, searching for the catch. the cruelty hiding beneath kindness. But he found nothing except those steady, silver-blue eyes and the quiet strength of a man who'd made his choice and wouldn't be swayed. "My name's Garrett Sawyer," the giant continued, his tone unchanged. "Got a ranch 15 miles west. Room enough. Food enough." He paused, his gaze softening fractionally. "And it's warmer than here." The twins looked at Thomas, their faces caught between hope and fear. Benjamin's eyes asked the question they all held: can we trust him? Thomas didn't know, but he knew with absolute certainty that refusing meant death. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and fear, something in Garrett Sawyer's presence, the way he'd knelt in the snow, the gentleness in those massive hands, the lack of hesitation in his offer, spoke of something Thomas hadn't encountered in weeks. "Decency." "Yes, sir," Thomas heard himself say. "We'll come." Garrett nodded once, as if this had never been in question. He moved with surprising efficiency, lifting Samuel as easily as if the boy weighed nothing, settling him on the horse. Then he helped the twins up, then Benjamin, arranging them with care. "You ride too," Garrett said to Thomas. But the older boy shook his head. "I can walk." "Sir?" Garrett studied him a long moment, then gave a short nod of what might have been approval. "Stubborn. Good. You'll need that where we're going." He took the horse's reins and began walking, leading them west into the gathering darkness. Thomas fell into step beside him, his legs screaming with each movement, but held upright by something more powerful than physical strength: hope. As they walked, the snow fell heavier, covering their tracks, erasing the road that had nearly claimed them. Behind them, the forest grew dark and silent. Ahead, somewhere beyond the white curtain of winter, lay a place called home. Thomas glanced at the giant walking beside him, at the easy way he bore the weight of 4 boys on his horse, at the breadth of shoulders that seemed capable of carrying the world. He didn't know what waited at the end of this journey. Didn't know if this stranger's kindness would hold or if new hardships lay ahead. But for the first time in days, weeks, months, Thomas felt the crushing weight on his chest ease just slightly. They weren't alone anymore. And somehow, that changed everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The journey took 4 hours through snow that fell thick as wool. Thomas walked in silence beside Garrett Sawyer, each step a battle against exhaustion that threatened to pull him under. His brothers had fallen asleep on the horse, their small bodies slumped together, held secure by Garrett's occasional adjustments to their positions without ever breaking stride. The giant spoke little, but what he said came measured and deliberate. He pointed out landmarks in the darkness: a lightning-split oak, a creek bed they crossed on stones, a ridge that marked the boundary of his land. Thomas listened, committing each detail to memory, understanding without being told that Garrett was teaching him the way home. When the ranch finally appeared through the snow, Thomas stopped breathing. He'd expected a cabin, maybe a lean-to with a smoking chimney. What rose before them was a sprawling timber structure, 2 stories tall, with a wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. Lamplight glowed warm in several windows. Beyond it stood a massive barn, corrals and outbuildings that spoke of prosperity Thomas hadn't imagined possible. "This is yours?" The words escaped before he could stop them. Garrett glanced at him, something that might have been amusement touching his eyes. "Built it myself. Took 6 years," he resumed walking. "Come on, let's get these boys warm." The interior matched the promise of the exterior. A great room dominated the first floor, its stone fireplace tall enough for Thomas to stand in. Wooden beams crossed the ceiling, hewn from trees that must have been ancient. Furniture built on the same massive scale as its owner filled the space. Chairs that could seat 2 normal men, a table that could accommodate a dozen. But it was the warmth that hit Thomas first. Blessed, overwhelming warmth that made his frozen skin prickle and burn. He stood swaying in the doorway as Garrett moved efficiently, carrying his brothers one by one to a long couch near the fire, arranging blankets around them with hands that seemed too large for such gentle work. Kitchen's through there, Garrett said, nodding toward an archway. Get yourself some water. Slowly, then come back. Thomas obeyed, his legs moving on instinct. The kitchen was as impressive as everything else. A massive iron stove, shelves lined with provisions, a hand pump at a deep sink. He drank from a tin cup, forcing himself to take small sips, though he wanted to gulp until his stomach burst. When he returned, Garrett had stoked the fire to a roaring blaze. The giant had removed his coat, revealing arms thick with muscle, even beneath his flannel shirt. He was stirring something in a pot hung over the fire, the smell making Thomas's knees weak. Venison stew, Garrett said without looking up. Been simmering since morning. Should be ready. Thomas watched his brothers sleep, their faces slack with exhaustion, but already less grey in the firelight. Samuel's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. The twins had curled together like puppies. Benjamin's hand had relaxed, no longer clenched in the constant fist of tension it had held for days. Why? Thomas asked suddenly, the question raw and unfiltered. Why did you help us? Garrett continued stirring, silent so long Thomas thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight that went beyond the words themselves. Found a family once. Years back. Winter like this. Father, mother, 3 children. He paused, his stirring slowing. Found them too late. Snow had drifted over their wagon. They'd been dead 2 days. The giant's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of emotion on that weathered face. Swore then I'd never pass by again. Never assume someone else would stop. He looked at Thomas directly. So when I saw you boys on that road, there wasn't a choice to make. There was only what needed doing. Thomas felt something crack open in his chest, a grief he'd been holding at bay since his parents died. Tears came hot and fast, and he couldn't stop them. He sank onto the floor, his body shaking with sobs that felt torn from somewhere deep. Garrett let him cry. Didn't offer platitudes or touch him. Simply ladled stew into bowls and set them aside to cool, giving Thomas the dignity of his grief without making it a spectacle. When Thomas finally quieted, his throat raw, his eyes burning, Garrett handed him a bowl and a spoon carved from wood. Eat, the giant said simply. Then sleep. Tomorrow's soon enough for everything else. The stew was the best thing Thomas had ever tasted, rich with meat and vegetables, thick with potatoes, seasoned with herbs he couldn't name. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling strength seep back into his limbs with each swallow. Garrett woke the others gently, one by one, feeding them small portions. Samuel ate sitting in the giant's lap, too weak to hold the bowl himself. The twins ate in drowsy silence, their eyes already closing between bites. Benjamin managed half a bowl before sleep claimed him again. Upstairs, Garrett said, gathering Samuel in one arm, Benjamin in the other as though they weighed nothing. 4 bedrooms. Take whichever you want. Thomas followed him up a staircase built wide enough for the giant's frame. The second floor held 6 doors along a central hallway. Garrett nudged one open with his boot, revealing a room with 2 beds, thick quilts, and a window that faced east. This one's got morning sun, Garrett said, settling Benjamin and Samuel into one bed. Helps with waking. He showed Thomas 2 more rooms, settling the twins in one. The third he left empty. For you, Garrett said to Thomas. Unless you'd rather stay with the young ones. Thomas looked at the room. A bed bigger than any he'd known, a chest of drawers, a chair by the window, a space of his own. The luxury of it felt almost obscene after weeks of huddling together against the cold. I'll stay with Samuel, Thomas said quietly. He wakes scared sometimes? Garrett nodded, approval clear in his eyes. Good man. He paused at the door. My room's downstairs if anyone needs anything. Don't hesitate. He left, his heavy footsteps descending the stairs. Thomas stood in the hallway, listening to his brother's breathing, the crackle of the fire below, the wind against the shutters. The house creaked and settled around him, solid and permanent. He went to check on each brother, tucking blankets tighter, brushing hair from foreheads, whispering promises he finally believed he might keep. When he finally climbed into bed beside Samuel, the warmth and softness felt foreign, almost threatening after so many nights on frozen ground. Sleep took him fast and deep. He woke to sunlight streaming through windows and the smell of bacon frying. For a moment, Thomas lay disoriented, unable to reconcile softness and warmth with the hardship that had become his reality. Then memory returned, the road, the giant, the impossible kindness. Samuel still slept beside him, his breathing deep and steady, his face peaceful for the first time in weeks. Thomas slipped from bed, his body aching but rested, and made his way downstairs. Garrett stood at the stove, working a massive cast-iron skillet with easy competence. The table was already set, 6 plates, 6 cups, utensils laid out with military precision. "Morning," Garrett said without turning. "How'd they sleep?" "Still sleeping," Thomas replied, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "Let them. Bodies need to recover." Garrett flipped bacon with a fork. "You hungry?" Thomas's stomach answered for him, growling loud enough to make Garrett's mouth twitch in what might have been a smile. "Sit." Thomas obeyed, settling into a chair that felt too large. Garrett brought him a plate loaded with bacon, eggs, and thick slices of bread, toasted golden. A cup of milk followed, then a jar of honey. "Eat what you can." No pressure. Thomas ate slowly, his shrunken stomach protesting even as he craved more. Garrett joined him with his own plate, the giant's portions making Thomas's look like a child's meal. They ate in companionable silence. Through the window, Thomas could see the ranch in full daylight. Corrals holding horses, the barn with its doors open, smoke rising from what looked like a bunkhouse beyond the main house. Snow covered everything, pristine and blinding in the morning sun. "You run this alone?" Thomas asked. Garrett swallowed, nodded. "Had hands." "They moved on last month. Headed to California." He shrugged his massive shoulders. "Winter's quiet work anyway. I manage." Thomas processed this, understanding dawning. "That's why you took us. You need workers." "No." Garrett's voice came firm, his pale eyes meeting Thomas's directly. "I took you because you needed help. What happens now, that's separate. But we'll work," Thomas said quickly. "We'll earn our keep. I can—" Garrett raised a hand, silencing him. "Listen to me, son. You and your brothers are welcome here, working or not. You're children who've been through hell. Nobody earns the right to safety and food. Those are givens." He leaned forward, his size somehow less intimidating and more reassuring. "That said, when you're ready, when your brothers are ready, there's work aplenty if you want it. I won't turn down help, but it's your choice, made freely. Understand?" Thomas felt his throat tighten again. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. Benjamin appeared, his hair wild, his eyes wary until he saw Thomas. Relief flooded his face. "Tommy?" "Right here, Ben, come eat." The morning unfolded in a gentle rhythm. The twins woke next, shy and uncertain, until food appeared before them. Samuel was last, emerging with the blanket wrapped around him like a cocoon, his small face peeking out. Garrett scooped him up without asking, settling the boy in his lap while fixing him a plate. Thomas watched his brothers eat, watched color return to their cheeks, watched the hollow desperation in their eyes begin to soften. He watched Garrett move among them with patient competence, refilling cups, answering quiet questions, never pushing but always present, and he began to believe that maybe, impossibly, they had found not just shelter, but home. The first week passed in a haze of recovery. The brothers slept long hours, their bodies demanding rest that had been denied for too long. Garrett moved through the house like a force of nature, quiet but ever present, appearing with meals at regular intervals, stoking fires, checking on fevers that came and went as their weakened systems fought to recover. Thomas tried to help from the start. On the second day, he attempted to carry firewood and nearly collapsed on the porch. Garrett caught him with one massive hand, steadying him with surprising gentleness. "Not yet," the giant said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Healing takes time. We're a burden," Thomas protested, shame burning in his chest. Garrett's eyes hardened slightly. "You're boys who need care. There's no burden in that." He guided Thomas back inside. "Sit, read if you want. There's books on the shelf." Thomas discovered the library that afternoon, an entire wall lined with volumes that seemed impossible for a ranch in the middle of Colorado wilderness. Leather-bound classics, agricultural manuals, books on history and philosophy, even poetry. He ran his fingers along the spines, wonder temporarily displacing his worry. "You read?" Garrett asked from the doorway, startling him. "Yes, sir. Father taught us." "Before—" Thomas's voice caught. "Take any you want." Garrett moved to the fireplace, adding logs with methodical precision. "I'm not much for conversation. Books are good company." Over the following days, a routine emerged. Garrett woke before dawn, tending to the animals and ranch work while the boys slept. He returned for breakfast, cooking meals that seemed designed to rebuild them: hearty soups, roasted meats, bread with butter and jam, milk fresh from the dairy cows Thomas glimpsed in the barn. The twins, Daniel and Matthew, were first to regain their energy. By the fourth day, they were exploring the house, their natural curiosity overcoming fear. Garrett tolerated their investigations with patience Thomas found remarkable, answering their endless questions in his rumbling baritone. "Why are you so tall?" Matthew asked with the bluntness of a 9-year-old. "Born that way," Garrett replied, not looking up from the leather harness he was mending. "My father was big. His father before him. Runs in blood. Are you the tallest man in the world?" Daniel chimed in. "Doubt it. But I'm tall enough for my work." He glanced at them. "You two want to help me oil this tack?" Their faces lit up. Garrett showed them how to work the oil into leather, his enormous hands guiding their small ones. Thomas watched from his chair, a book open but unread in his lap, observing how naturally Garrett adapted to children despite clearly living alone. Benjamin remained the most withdrawn. At 12, he'd seen enough to understand what they'd lost in ways the younger boys couldn't fully grasp. He spent hours staring out windows, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid with tension that wouldn't ease. On the 5th evening, Thomas found him on the porch, huddled in a coat too large for him, watching snow fall in the darkness. "Ben?" Thomas joined him, their breath clouding in the cold. "You all right? When does he make us leave?" Benjamin's voice came flat, emotionless. Thomas felt his chest tighten. "What? When does he decide we're too much trouble? When does he get tired of feeding us?" Benjamin finally looked at him, his eyes old beyond his years. "Nobody keeps 5 extra mouths without wanting something, Tommy. Nobody." The words cut because Thomas had thought them himself, late at night, when doubt crept in. "I don't think Garrett's like that." "Everyone's like that." Benjamin turned back to the snow. "We learned that already." Thomas had no answer. He wrapped an arm around his brother's shoulders, and they stood together in silence until the cold drove them inside. Garrett was waiting in the great room, working on a piece of wood with a carving knife. He looked up as they entered, his pale eyes moving between them with that unsettling perception. "Benjamin," he said simply. "Come here." Benjamin went reluctantly, his body language defensive. Garrett set down his carving. Thomas could see it was taking the shape of a horse, and regarded the boy steadily. "You don't trust me," Garrett stated. Not a question. Benjamin's jaw worked. Finally, he shook his head. "Good." Garrett's response clearly surprised him. "Trust should be earned, not given freely. Especially after what you've been through." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, making himself somehow less imposing despite his size. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Benjamin. I'm asking you to watch. Watch what I do, not what I say. Watch how I treat your brothers. Watch whether my actions match my words." Garrett paused, his voice dropping lower. "And when you're ready, if you're ready, you can decide for yourself whether I'm worthy of trust. No pressure, no judgment. Fair." Benjamin studied him for a long moment. Something in the boy's rigid posture eased fractionally. "Fair," he whispered. "Good man." Garrett picked up his carving again. "Now, you ever worked with wood?" By the end of the week, the brothers had regained enough strength to venture outside. Garrett took them to the barn, a cathedral of timber and stone that housed 6 horses, 4 dairy cows, chickens in a heated coop, and a goat that Benjamin immediately claimed as his own. "Her name's Maggie," Garrett said, as the goat head-butted Benjamin's hand. "Stubborn as stone, but produces good milk." The twins discovered the hayloft, perfect for climbing and hiding. Samuel, still weak but improving, was content to sit on a hay bale and watch the chickens peck and strut. Thomas found himself drawn to the horses, magnificent animals, well fed and groomed, who regarded him with gentle curiosity. "That's Goliath," Garrett said, approaching with an apple in his palm. The largest horse, a draft mix with a coat like polished mahogany, lipped it delicately from Garrett's hand. "He's the one carried you boys here?" Thomas reached out tentatively. Goliath's nose was velvet soft against his palm. "He's beautiful, good-tempered too. Rare in animals this size." Garrett glanced at Thomas. "You ride?" "A little. Father had a horse before." He stopped. "I'll teach you properly then. All of you." Garrett moved to the next stall. "A man in this country needs to know horses." Over the following days, lessons began. Not formal instruction, but organic teaching woven into daily life. Garrett showed them how to muck stalls, how to measure feed, how to check hooves for stones and brush coats until they gleamed. He demonstrated the proper way to approach a horse, how to read their body language, when to be firm and when to be gentle. The twins took to it naturally, their energy finding purpose. Benjamin grew more animated around the animals than Thomas had seen him with people. Even Samuel, despite his size and lingering weakness, learned to scatter grain for the chickens, with Garrett's massive hand steadying his small one. Thomas absorbed everything, driven by a desperate need to prove his worth. He woke before dawn to help with morning chores, worked until his muscles screamed, pushed himself beyond exhaustion. Garrett watched, but said nothing, allowing Thomas to learn his own limits. Those limits arrived on the 10th day. Thomas was hauling water from the pump to the barn when his vision suddenly narrowed to a tunnel. The bucket slipped from his grip. He felt himself falling, the ground rushing up to meet him. He woke in his bed, Garrett sitting in the chair beside him, a damp cloth in his hand. "Easy," the giant said as Thomas tried to sit up. "You collapsed. Been out about an hour." Shame flooded through Thomas, hot and bitter. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to—" "Stop!" Garrett's voice cut through his spiral. "You've been driving yourself like a man possessed." Why Thomas couldn't meet his eyes. "We have to earn our place. Have to prove we're worth keeping." "Worth keeping." Garrett repeated the words slowly, as if tasting something foul. He leaned forward, forcing Thomas to look at him. "Listen to me, Thomas Garrett. Your worth isn't measured in work. You're 16 years old. You've kept 4 brothers alive through circumstances that would break grown men. You've got nothing to prove to anyone, least of all me. But we're taking your food, your space, your mind to give," Garrett interrupted firmly. "I'm not running a business here. I'm not keeping ledgers of debt." His expression softened slightly. "You want to help? Fine. But you help as a boy learning, not as a debtor paying off obligation. Understand the difference?" Thomas felt tears threatening again. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Good. Now rest. Your brothers need you whole, not broken." Garrett stood, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. "And Thomas, they need you to show them it's safe to be children again. You keep trying to be a man grown, they'll think they have to do the same." The words settled in Thomas's chest like stones, heavy with truth he'd been avoiding. That evening, Garrett gathered all 5 brothers in the great room. A fire roared in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The giant settled into his massive chair, Samuel already climbing into his lap without hesitation, a trust that had grown naturally over days of gentle care. "We need to talk about the future," Garrett began, his voice measured. "You boys have been here almost 2 weeks. You're recovering, getting stronger." He paused, his gaze moving across each face. "Question is, what do you want? What happens next?" Silence filled the room. The twins looked at each other, then at Thomas. Benjamin stared at his hands. Samuel burrowed deeper against Garrett's chest. Thomas cleared his throat. "We don't have anywhere else to go, sir." "That's not what I asked." Garrett's tone remained gentle but insistent. "I asked what you want." "To stay," Benjamin said suddenly, his voice stronger than Thomas had heard it in weeks. "If you'll have us." "I want to stay." "Me too," the twins chorused immediately. Samuel looked up at Garrett, his small hand clutching the giant's shirt. Don't make us leave, please." Garrett's expression softened in a way Thomas had never seen. The giant cleared his throat, emotion flickering across his weathered features before he composed himself. "Then you stay," he said simply. "Long as you want. This is your home now." The words hung in the air, carrying weight that transformed everything. "Not temporary shelter, not charity with an expiration date. Home. There'll be rules," Garrett continued, his voice returning to its usual rumble. "School lessons daily. I'll teach what I know, get books for what I don't, chores appropriate to your ages, respect for each other in this house." He paused. "And honesty. Always honesty, even when it's hard. Especially then. Agreed?" 5 heads nodded in unison. "Good." Garrett shifted Samuel in his arms. "Now who wants to hear about the time I tracked a mountain lion for 3 days in a blizzard?" The twins perked up immediately. Even Benjamin leaned forward, interest sparking in his eyes. Thomas settled back in his chair, watching his brothers' faces light with wonder as Garrett spun his tale. The giant's deep voice filling the room like a blanket of safety. For the first time since their parents died, Thomas felt the crushing weight of responsibility ease. Not vanish, he would always carry the scars of those weeks, but distribute itself across broader shoulders, one strong enough to bear it. Outside, wind howled across the ranch. Snow piled deeper against the walls. Winter pressed close and merciless, but inside, 5 brothers learned what it meant to be warm again, to be safe again, to be home. Winter loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly. By late December, the brothers had settled into rhythms that felt almost natural. Mornings began with chores, feeding animals, collecting eggs, hauling wood. Afternoons brought lessons at the great table, Garrett teaching mathematics and reading with a patience that surprised Thomas. Evenings were for stories, for games carved from wood, for the quiet comfort of being together. But supplies were dwindling. Thomas noticed it first, the flour barrel showing its bottom, the salt running low, the lamp oil that would last maybe another week. He said nothing, unwilling to burden Garrett, but the giant missed little. "Town run tomorrow," Garrett announced one evening, setting aside the harness he was mending. "Need provisions before the next storm hits." The brothers exchanged glances. None had left the ranch since arriving. The outside world felt distant, almost mythical, a place of hardship they'd escaped. "I'll go with you," Thomas said immediately. Garrett studied him. "It's a hard ride, 6 hours there and back. I can manage." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "And you'll need help carrying." Something like approval flickered in Garrett's pale eyes. "All right, we leave at dawn." That night, Thomas lay awake, anxiety churning in his stomach. He'd been insulated here, protected by distance and Garrett's presence. Tomorrow he'd face the world again, and the world, in his experience, was rarely kind to boys without family or fortune. They departed as promised, the sky still dark, stars fading into pre-dawn grey. Garrett rode Goliath, Thomas on a smaller mare named Duchess. The giant had outfitted him with proper winter gear, a heavy coat, gloves lined with fur, boots that actually fit. The ride was silent at first, both of them breathing steam into the frozen air. The landscape rolled past, endless white broken by dark stands of pine. Thomas found himself studying Garrett, the way he sat the massive horse with easy competence. The constant scanning of the horizon, the alertness that never quite faded even in conversation. "You expecting trouble?" Thomas asked finally. Garrett glanced at him. "Always expect trouble. Usually wrong, but the one time you're not..." He let the sentence hang. "Better to be ready." They reached Blackwater Creek just after 9. The town sprawled along a frozen stream. Perhaps 30 buildings clustered around a main street. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved between shops bundled against cold. It looked peaceful, ordinary. Thomas felt his stomach tighten anyway. They hitched the horses outside Brennan's general store. Garrett dismounted, his size immediately drawing attention from passers-by. Thomas saw heads turn, conversations pause, eyes track the giant's movement. "Stay close," Garrett murmured, low enough only Thomas heard. "Don't engage if anyone speaks rudely. Let me handle it." The warning came too late. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, a man emerged from the store, tall but not as tall as Garrett, with a sheriff's star pinned to his coat. His eyes narrowed as he took in Garrett, then dropped to Thomas with an expression that made the boy's skin crawl. "Sawyer," the sheriff said, his tone flat. "I heard you'd taken in strays." Garrett's expression didn't change. "Sheriff Monroe didn't know hospitality was a crime." "Hospitality?" Monroe's mouth twisted. "That what we're calling it?" He looked at Thomas again, assessing. "Boy, you all right? This man treating you proper?" Thomas felt heat rise in his face. The implication was clear and ugly. "Yes, sir, Mr. Sawyer's been nothing but kind." "Kind?" Monroe drew the word out, skeptical. "Man lives alone for 15 years, suddenly takes in 5 boys. You'll forgive me for asking questions." Garrett moved, not aggressively, but with enough presence to draw Monroe's attention back. "Ask them." "But you'll find nothing to question." His voice dropped lower. "And Monroe, don't mistake kindness for weakness. Not in me, and not in what I'll tolerate said about those boys." Something passed between the men, a tension Thomas couldn't quite read, but felt in his bones. Finally, Monroe stepped aside, though his expression remained hostile. "Watch yourself, Sawyer. People talk. Let them." Garrett moved past him into the store, Thomas following quickly. Inside, the warmth hit like a wave. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from flour to fabric to farm tools. An elderly woman stood behind the counter, her face creasing into a genuine smile as Garrett approached. "Garrett Sawyer. Been months since you've shown your face." Her eyes found Thomas. "And who's this young man?" "Thomas Garrett, ma'am," Thomas said, finding his manners. "Pleased to meet you. Garrett." Her eyebrows rose. "Relation?" "No, ma'am. Just coincidence. He's staying with me," Garrett added, pulling a list from his pocket. "Him and his brothers. They needed a home." The woman's expression softened immediately. "Oh, you poor dear. Well, Garrett Sawyer's a good man. You're in fine hands." She took the list, scanning it. "I'll get this together. Might take a bit. It's quite a load." As she bustled away, Thomas noticed other customers in the store. A woman with 2 children watched them from the corner, her expression cautious but not unkind. 2 men, examining rope near the back wall, spoke in low voices, their eyes flicking repeatedly toward Garrett. Thomas moved closer to the giant, feeling suddenly exposed. "Ignore them," Garrett murmured, examining a display of knives with apparent fascination. Small towns thrive on gossip. Give them nothing to feed on, but ignoring proved difficult. One of the men approached, middle-aged, with a weathered face and skeptical eyes. "Sawyer, heard you're running an orphanage now." "Heard wrong," Garrett replied without looking up. "I'm housing boys who needed housing. 5 of them, I'm told." "That's a lot of mouths. It's enough." Garrett finally turned, his size making the other man take an involuntary step back. "Something you need, Porter?" Porter's jaw worked. "Just seems odd. Man like you, no family, suddenly playing father. Makes folks wonder about your intentions." The temperature in the store seemed to drop. Thomas felt Garrett go very still beside him. Not the stillness of fear, but of a predator deciding whether to strike. "My intentions," Garrett said, his voice quiet in a way that was somehow more dangerous than shouting, "are to give 5 orphaned boys shelter and care. If your mind goes somewhere darker than that, Porter, that says more about you than me." Porter flushed red. "Now see here." "No, you see here." Garrett straightened to his full height, towering over the other man. "Those boys have been through hell. They've lost everything. And if you or anyone else in this town wants to add to their suffering with ugly speculation, you'll answer to me. Understood?" Porter sputtered, glancing around for support. The other customers had gone silent, watching. Finally, he backed away, muttering about sensitivity and respect. The elderly shopkeeper returned with arms full of supplies, her expression apologetic. "Don't mind Porter. He's got a suspicious nature." She began stacking items on the counter. "You're doing a good thing, Garrett. Don't let anyone tell you different. Appreciate that, Mrs. Brennan." Garrett's tone softened for her. "What's the damage?" She tallied the items, quoting a figure that made Thomas's chest tighten, more money than he'd seen in his life. Garrett pulled bills from his coat without hesitation, paying in full. "Thomas, start carrying these to the horses. I'll get the heavy sacks." They loaded the supplies in silence, Thomas making multiple trips, while Garrett handled the 100-pound flour and feed bags like they weighed nothing. People watched from windows, from doorways. Thomas felt their stares like physical weight. On the last trip, as Thomas secured a crate to Duchess's saddle, a voice spoke behind him. "You one of Sawyer's boys?" Thomas turned to find a boy about his age, 16 or so, with dark hair and a friendly enough face. "I'm staying with him, yes. He treating you right. My pa says there's something wrong about a man living alone taking in kids." Thomas felt anger flash hot in his chest. "Your pa's wrong. Mr. Sawyer saved our lives. He's a good man." The other boy held up his hands. "Hey, no offense. Just asking." He paused. "Name's William. William Porter." "Porter." Thomas's voice went flat. "Your father was just inside making accusations." William's face reddened. "Yeah, pa's... he's like that. Sees darkness everywhere." He glanced toward the store. "For what it's worth, I think what Sawyer's doing is decent. My pa, he wouldn't take in a stray dog if it was starving." Some of Thomas's anger faded. "We should go. Wait." William pulled something from his pocket, a wooden carving of a horse, beautifully detailed. "I whittle. Thought maybe your younger brothers might like this. I don't know. Welcome, I guess." Thomas took it carefully, surprised by the gesture. "That's kind of you. We're not all like Pa." William smiled slightly. "Maybe I'll see you around. Town picnic in spring if you're still here." "We'll be here," Thomas said with certainty. "This is home now." Garrett emerged from the store, his arms full of the last supplies. He nodded to William, who quickly returned it before hurrying away. Once everything was secured, they mounted and turned toward home. They'd barely cleared town when Garrett spoke. That happened often. People like Porter. Thomas considered lying, then remembered Garrett's rule about honesty. "Yes, sir, but there are good ones too. William, that boy at the end, he was decent." Garrett nodded slowly. "World's full of both. Learning to tell the difference quickly, that's the trick." He glanced at Thomas. "How are you holding up?" "Angry," Thomas admitted. "People don't know anything about us, about what you did, but they judge anyway." "They're afraid," Garrett said simply. "Fear makes people small, makes them see threats where none exist. They can't understand why someone would help without wanting something, so they invent dark reasons." He paused. "Don't let their fear become your burden." They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them. Thomas found himself processing what had happened, not just the hostility, but Garrett's responses. The giant had defended them fiercely, but without losing control, had faced down accusations with dignity, had protected Thomas without making him feel weak. "Thank you," Thomas said finally, "for what you said back there, for standing up for us. Don't thank me for doing what's right." Garrett's voice carried quiet steel. "Those boys are under my protection now. Anyone who wants to hurt them, with words or otherwise, goes through me first." The weight of that promise settled over Thomas like a warm blanket. For so long, he'd been the protector, the one standing between his brothers and the world. To have someone else shoulder that burden, someone with the strength to actually bear it, it was almost overwhelming. "Monroe, the sheriff," Thomas ventured. "He seemed to really dislike you." Garrett's jaw tightened slightly. "We have history. His son was a hand here years back. Got drunk, tried to break a horse that wasn't ready. Horse threw him. Boy broke his back." He paused. "Monroe blamed me, said I should have stopped it. But his son was grown, made his own choices. Monroe's never forgiven me for not taking responsibility for another man's foolishness. That's not fair. No, but grief rarely is." Garrett glanced at him. "People hurt, they need someone to blame. Sometimes you're just the nearest target." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable quiet, arriving back at the ranch as afternoon sun painted the snow gold. The boys rushed out when they heard horses, the twins practically vibrating with excitement. "You're back. Did you bring candy? Did you see Indians? Was there a gunfight?" Garrett's mouth twitched. "No candy, no Indians, no gunfight. Just supplies." He began unloading with Thomas's help. Though I did see a sheriff who desperately needs a sense of humor. Benjamin helped carry bags inside, while Samuel hung on Garrett's leg, chattering about the goat's antics that day. The normalcy of it, the warmth of homecoming, pushed the ugliness of town into background shadow. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, Thomas told his brothers an edited version of the trip. He mentioned William's gift, the carved horse now held reverently by Samuel, but downplayed the hostility. Garrett caught his eye across the table, a small nod of approval for protecting his brother's peace. Later, as Thomas helped clean dishes, Benjamin joined him at the basin. Was it bad in town? His brother asked quietly. Thomas considered his words carefully. Some people were suspicious, but Garrett handled it. People think he's doing something wrong. By keeping us, people are afraid of what they don't understand, Thomas echoed Garrett's words. But their fear isn't our problem. We know the truth. Benjamin nodded slowly, then surprised Thomas by hugging him, brief but fierce. I'm glad we stayed. Even if the town hates us, I'm glad. Me too, Ben. Me too. That night, snow began falling again, thick and silent. Thomas stood at his window, watching it accumulate, thinking about Sheriff Monroe's accusations and Porter's implications, thinking about William's kindness and Mrs. Brennan's support. The world outside was complicated, full of judgment and fear. But inside these walls, they'd built something simpler, something true. Downstairs, he heard Garrett's deep voice reading to the younger boys, some adventure tale that had them gasping with delight. Samuel's high laugh cut through, pure and uncomplicated. Thomas smiled, turning from the window. Let the town talk. Let them speculate and judge and fear. They had each other. They had Garrett. They had home. And that, Thomas was learning, was worth more than any stranger's approval. January arrived with temperatures that made the previous cold seem merciful. Ice formed thick on windows, turning the world outside into abstract patterns of frost. The brothers stayed close to the fire, their lessons continuing even as wind howled against the walls with voices that sounded almost human. Garrett taught them practical skills now, how to read weather signs, how to navigate by stars, how to treat frostbite and recognize hypothermia. Skills, Thomas realized, that had kept them alive on that frozen road before the giant found them. Why do you know all this? Matthew asked one afternoon, watching Garrett demonstrate knot tying with lengths of rope thicker than the boy's wrist. Garrett's hands paused. Learned young. Had to? He resumed the demonstration, his massive fingers surprisingly dexterous. My father died when I was 14. Winter storm. He went to check the cattle and never came back. The room went quiet. Even Samuel, usually restless, sat perfectly still. Found him 3 days later, Garrett continued, his voice matter-of-fact but carrying undertones of old pain. Frozen. He'd tried to make it back but got turned around in the snow. If he'd known better, if I'd known better, might have ended different. So you learned, Thomas said softly. So no one else would die from ignorance? Garrett met his eyes. That's right, Benjamin spoke up, his voice tentative. What about your mother? She tried to keep the ranch going. Couldn't. Town took it for debts. Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I was 15. Too young to fight it legally. Lost everything? That's not fair, Daniel said indignantly. No, but fair doesn't matter much when you're powerless. Garrett finished the knot, pulling it tight. Spent the next 10 years working other people's ranches. Saved every penny. Bought this land when I was 25. Built everything you see with these hands. He held them up, scarred and calloused. And I swore I'd never let anyone take it. Never be powerless again. Thomas felt something click into place. Garrett's fierce protection of them, his insistence on teaching self-sufficiency, his unwillingness to depend on town approval, it all made sense now. The giant had been where they were, had lost everything, had clawed his way back. He understood because he'd lived it. That night, Thomas lay awake thinking about Garrett's story. About a 14-year-old boy searching for his father in a blizzard. About losing home and family and having to rebuild from nothing. About the strength it took not just to survive, but to remain kind after such hardship. Sleep finally took him. But his dreams were troubled, full of snow and searching and voices calling from the darkness. He woke to Benjamin shaking him urgently, his brother's face pale in the pre-dawn gloom. "Tommy, someone's outside." Thomas sat up instantly, his heart hammering. "What?" I heard voices. "And horses." Benjamin's hands trembled. "Lots of them." They moved to the window together. In the grey light before sunrise, Thomas could make out shapes in the yard. 5 riders, maybe 6, sitting their horses in a loose semicircle facing the house. Even from this distance, their stillness felt threatening. "Get the others up," Thomas whispered. Quietly, while Benjamin woke the twins and Samuel, Thomas crept downstairs. Garrett was already there, standing at the window with his rifle in hand, his posture alert but not panicked. "You see them?" Thomas asked. "Been watching for 10 minutes?" Garrett didn't turn from the window. "Waiting to see what they want. Is it the sheriff?" "No, worse." Garrett's voice carried an edge Thomas hadn't heard before. "That's Cole Brennan and his boys." "Mrs. Brennan from the store. Is that her family?" "Her husband. He died 5 years back. Cole's her nephew, inherited the ranch." Garrett's grip tightened on the rifle. "He's got a mean streak and too much influence. If he's here, it's not for anything good." As if summoned by the words, one rider separated from the group, a broad-shouldered man who dismounted and walked toward the porch with the swagger of someone used to getting his way. He stopped at the bottom step, close enough for conversation, but far enough to dodge if violence erupted. "Sawyer." His voice carried sharp and clear in the cold air. "We need to talk." Garrett set the rifle within reach but didn't pick it up. He opened the door, stepping onto the porch with Thomas following, before he could be stopped. Cole Brennan was younger than Garrett by maybe 10 years, with a handsome face marred by cruelty around his mouth and eyes. He looked at Garrett with barely concealed hostility. Then his gaze slid to Thomas with something worse. Calculation. "This one of them. The orphans you've collected." "State your business, Brennan." Garrett's voice was ice. "My business is the town's safety." Cole's smile didn't reach his eyes. "See, folks are concerned, wondering what exactly you're doing out here with 5 young boys. No wife, no family, just you and them." He let the implication hang ugly between them. Thomas felt rage flood through him, hot and immediate. "He saved our lives." "Easy, son." Garrett's hand came to rest on Thomas's shoulder, heavy and steadying. His attention never left Cole. "You rode all the way out here in the cold to spread gossip? Could have saved the trouble. Not gossip when the whole town's talking." "Sheriff's asking questions too." Cole took a step closer. "Some think maybe those boys aren't here of their own free will. Maybe they need rescuing." "Rescuing?" Garrett's laugh was harsh, humorless. "From shelter and food. From someone who's teaching them to survive. You want to rescue them back to the streets, Brennan?" "I want to ensure they're being treated proper." Cole's eyes narrowed. "And I want to know what you're getting out of this arrangement. Man doesn't take on 5 mouths without wanting something in return." The implication was so vile, so twisted, that Thomas couldn't contain himself. "You're disgusting." "Garrett's been nothing but—" "Thomas, inside." Garrett's voice carried command that couldn't be ignored. "But now." Thomas retreated reluctantly, but stopped just inside the door, where he could still hear. His brothers had gathered on the stairs, their faces frightened. Benjamin held Samuel close. Outside, Garrett descended the steps, his size making Cole take an involuntary step back. The giant didn't stop until they stood face to face, close enough that his voice could lower to something more dangerous than shouting. "Let me make something clear, Brennan. Those boys had nothing. They were starving to death on a frozen road. I gave them home. I gave them hope. And the fact that your mind, that anyone's mind, goes somewhere dark, says everything about you and nothing about me." Easy to say, "I'm not finished." Garrett's voice dropped even lower. "You want to check on their welfare? Fine, ask them. Examine them for signs of abuse. You'll find nothing, because there's nothing to find. But you come to my land making accusations, implying things that aren't true, poisoning their safety with your suspicions. That ends now." Cole's jaw worked. The town has a right. The town has opinions, not rights. Not on my property. Garrett straightened to his full height. This is my land. Those are my boys under my protection. You want to challenge that? Bring the sheriff with a legitimate complaint. Otherwise, get off my property and don't come back. The other riders had been inching closer during the confrontation. One called out, "Cole, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Davis." Cole's attention never left Garrett. "You think you can hide out here? Think people will forget?" "I think," Garrett said carefully, "that I've been patient with town gossip. But my patience has limits and you're testing them." He gestured to the riders. "Take your men and leave." While I'm still asking politely, something in Garrett's tone must have penetrated Cole's bravado. The younger man held his ground another moment, then spat in the snow. "This isn't over, Sawyer. People are watching. Let them watch. They'll see 5 boys being raised right. Unless you'd rather they see me remove trespassers from my land by force," Cole remounted, jerking his horse's head around roughly. "You're making enemies, Sawyer. Dangerous ones. Then they can stand in line behind all the others." The riders departed, hoofbeats fading into the frozen morning. Garrett stood motionless on the porch until they vanished completely. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, the only sign of tension releasing. He turned to find all 5 brothers in the doorway, their faces reflecting various degrees of fear and anger, everyone inside. Now they gathered in the great room. Garrett built up the fire, his movements deliberate, giving himself time to compose his thoughts. Finally, he settled into his chair and faced them. "I need you to understand something," he began, his voice heavy. "The town doesn't trust what they don't understand. Men like Cole Brennan, they need everyone to fit into boxes they recognize. A man alone taking in orphans, that doesn't fit. So they create narratives that do. But the narratives are lies," Thomas protested. "Doesn't matter. Truth is less important than the story people want to believe." Garrett leaned forward. "This is going to get harder before it gets easier. More people will come asking questions. The sheriff might show up. You'll face suspicion every time you go to town." Samuel's voice was small. "Do we have to leave?" "No." Garrett's answer was immediate and absolute. "You're not leaving. This is your home. But you need to be prepared for what's coming." Benjamin stood abruptly, his face flushed. "Then let me help. Let me tell people the truth, that you saved us, that you're good, that anyone who says different is lying." "Ben," Thomas started. "No." Benjamin's voice cracked. "I'm tired of people hurting him for being decent. I'm tired of hiding while he fights our battles." He turned to Garrett. "You said we're your boys under your protection. Well, you're our family too. That goes both ways." Something shifted in Garrett's expression, surprise, then something deeper, warmer. "That's brave, Benjamin." "But we should all talk," Matthew interrupted, standing beside his brother. "All of us. Tell everyone together what really happened." "People won't listen," Thomas said, though pride swelled in his chest at his brother's courage. "Some will," Garrett said slowly. "Not everyone's like Brennan. Mrs. Brennan herself, others in town, they know me. They'll listen." He paused, considering. "There's a town meeting next month. Usually just ranch business and planning for spring. But if we attended, if you boys spoke, would it help?" Thomas asked. "Might, or might make things worse. Brennan and his supporters could use it to attack further." Garrett's jaw tightened. "I won't risk you unless you're certain." The brothers looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them, forged through shared hardship, through being all each other had in the world, through the bond of survival. "We're certain," Thomas said, speaking for all of them. Garrett studied each face, seeing determination that matched his own. Finally he nodded. "All right, but we prepare. We make sure our story is clear, consistent, and unshakable. We leave no room for doubt." Over the following days, they practiced. Not rehearsing speeches, Garrett insisted it sound natural, but ensuring everyone understood the timeline, the facts, the truth of what had happened. Thomas told the story of their parents' deaths, the desperate journey, the moment Garrett found them. The younger boys added details about life at the ranch, about lessons and chores and feeling safe. Benjamin, surprisingly, became the most articulate. "People think kindness always wants something back," he said during one practice session. But Garrett proved that's not true. He gave us everything and asked for nothing. That's what real family does. Garrett had turned away at those words, but not before Thomas saw emotion cross his weathered face. Between preparations, life continued. The boys' lessons expanded. Garrett teaching them to shoot, to track, to understand the land in ways that went beyond simple survival. He was preparing them not just to survive, but to thrive, to become men who could stand on their own, but always the threat lingered. They saw riders sometimes in the distance watching the ranch. Once Thomas found a crude message carved into a fence post. "Children stealer." He removed it before the younger boys could see, but Garrett knew. The giant said nothing, only gripped Thomas's shoulder in silent acknowledgement. The night before the town meeting, Thomas couldn't sleep. He found Garrett on the porch, standing in the freezing dark, his breath steaming. "Can't rest either?" the giant asked without turning. Thomas joined him, wrapping his coat tighter. "Nervous? Good. Means you understand what's at stake." Garrett glanced at him. "Tomorrow people will judge us. They'll look for cracks in our story, reasons to doubt. You ready for that?" "Are you?" Garrett's smile was grim. "I've been fighting other people's opinions my whole life. One more battle won't kill me." He paused. "But I need to know. If this goes badly, if they try to take you boys, you'll fight to stay?" "With everything we have," Thomas said without hesitation. "Good." Garrett's hand came to rest on his shoulder, that familiar weight of protection and trust. "Because I'm not giving you up without a war. Legal, social, whatever it takes. You're mine now, all of you. And I protect what's mine." In the darkness, Thomas smiled. "We protect what's ours, too." They stood together in the frozen night, the ranch quiet around them, preparing for the battle to come. Tomorrow they would face the town's judgment, but tonight they were simply family, and that, Thomas knew, was the strongest foundation of all. The meeting hall sat at the end of Blackwater Creek's main street, a timber structure built to accommodate the entire community when necessary. By the time Garrett and the boys arrived, wagons and horses already crowded the hitching posts, and lamplight spilled from every window. Thomas felt his stomach twist as they approached. Through the glass, he could see the hall packed with people. Ranchers, shopkeepers, farmers, their wives and older children. Easily 100 souls, maybe more. All of them would judge whether 5 orphaned boys deserved the home they'd found. "Remember," Garrett said quietly, helping Samuel down from the wagon, "truth is your weapon. Don't embellish, don't get angry. Just tell what happened." The twins nodded solemnly, their usual energy muted by the gravity of the moment. Benjamin's jaw was set, his expression determined but tense. Thomas took Samuel's hand, feeling the small fingers grip tight. They entered together, and conversation died like a snuffed candle. Every head turned. Eyes tracked their movement as Garrett led them down the center aisle, his sighs making people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Thomas heard whispers, some curious, some hostile. All speculative. "That's them. 5 of them. Can you imagine? Look how young that one is." Sawyer's got nerve showing up here. They reached the front where chairs had been arranged facing the crowd. Garrett remained standing, a wall of protection between his boys and the assembled town. Sheriff Monroe sat to one side with Cole Brennan, both men wearing expressions of cold satisfaction. The mayor, a portly man named Harrison Fletcher, rapped his gavel on a small podium. "Order, let's have order!" The murmuring subsided. Fletcher's eyes moved between Garrett and the boys, his face professionally neutral. "Mr. Sawyer, you requested time on tonight's agenda. You have the floor." Garrett stepped forward, his hands loose at his sides, his voice carrying easily through the hall without shouting. "Thank you, Mayor Fletcher. I'm here because rumors have been spreading about me and these boys. Rather than let gossip poison the truth, we're here to address concerns directly. Mighty convenient," Cole Brennan called out. "Coming here to control the narrative before anyone can ask real questions." "You're welcome to ask whatever questions you have," Garrett replied evenly. "That's why we're here." Sheriff Monroe stood, his badge catching lamplight. "Then let's start simple. These boys, where'd they come from? How'd you acquire them?" The word acquire made Thomas's skin crawl as if they were property. Garrett's eyes hardened. I didn't acquire anyone, Sheriff. I found them freezing to death on the road 15 miles east of my ranch. They were starving, sick, and alone. They brought them home, just like that. Cole's voice dripped skepticism. Found 5 boys, took them in, no questions asked. What questions should I have asked? Garrett turned to face him fully. Should I have interrogated dying children? Should I have left them in the snow while I rode for authorities who might not arrive for days? You should have brought them to town, Monroe said sharply. Let proper authorities handle it. By the time I could have made that trip, they'd be dead. Garrett's voice remained calm, but carried steel beneath. I made the choice any decent human being would make. I saved their lives first. Everything else came after. A woman near the front, Mrs. Brennan from the general store, stood up. Mayor Fletcher, if I may. I've known Garrett Sawyer for 20 years. He's an honest man. If he says those boys were dying, I believe him. Believing and knowing are different things, Cole shot back. We only have his word for any of this. For all we know, he took those boys from somewhere, made up this story. That's enough. Garrett's voice cut through like a blade. You want proof? Fine, Thomas, stand up. Thomas rose on shaking legs, feeling every eye in the hall bore into him. Tell them, Garrett said gently. Tell them what happened before I found you. Thomas swallowed hard, his mouth dry. He'd practiced this, but facing actual people, their judgment written on their faces, made the words stick. Finally, he forced them out. Our parents died from fever in Silver Peak. Mother first, then father 2 days later. We had no other family, no one to take us in. The town couldn't help. They were barely surviving themselves. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, the truth grounding him. I'm the oldest. I tried to keep my brothers alive, but I didn't know how. We ran out of food the first day. Couldn't make snares work. Couldn't find shelter. He paused, the memories flooding back with visceral intensity. By the 3rd day, my youngest brother couldn't walk anymore. We were all dying, I knew it. I was just trying to keep them warm when Mr. Sawyer found us. Silence filled the hall. Thomas saw some faces soften, others remain hard. He gave us food, carried Samuel on his horse, walked miles through snow to bring us to his ranch. Thomas's voice wavered, but didn't break. He didn't have to. He could have ridden past. But he stopped. He helped. He saved us. Pretty speech, Cole said, though his tone had lost some of its edge. Probably coached them on what to say. I'll speak too. Benjamin stood abruptly, his face flushed but determined. Nobody coached me. Nobody told me what to think. I'm 12 years old, and I know when someone's good or bad. Garrett Sawyer is good. The twins stood together. He teaches us, Daniel said. Reads to us, Matthew added. Makes sure we eat. Daniel continued. Never hits us, Matthew finished. Samuel, still sitting, looked up at Garrett with complete trust. He's my family now. The simple declaration from a 6-year-old seemed to impact the crowd more than anything else. Thomas saw expressions shift, doubt creeping into certainty. An older rancher stood. Thomas recognized him from town, though he didn't know the name. I got a question for the boys. Any of you, can you leave if you want? Does Sawyer let you go places without him? Yes, sir, Thomas answered. We ride around the ranch, go to the barn whenever we want. He's teaching us to be independent, not dependent. What about schooling? A woman asked. Are you getting proper education? Mr. Sawyer teaches us every afternoon, Benjamin replied. Reading, writing, mathematics, history. He's got more books than anyone I've ever known. What about discipline? Another voice called. Man raising 5 boys alone. How's he handle misbehavior? Garrett spoke before the boys could. Same way any parent would. Extra chores, early bedtime, loss of privileges. Never physical punishment. Never verbal abuse. They're children, not criminals. Easy to say, Sheriff Monroe interjected. We've only got your word these boys aren't being mistreated behind closed doors. Then inspect my home. Garrett's challenge rang through the hall. Right now, tonight, every room, every building on my property. Check for signs of abuse, mistreatment, anything improper. You'll find nothing because there's nothing to find. Monroe's eyes narrowed. That's quite an offer. It's not an offer, it's a dare. Garrett stepped closer to the sheriff. You've been making accusations, spreading suspicions. Put your money where your mouth is. Come inspect. Prove your claims or admit you're wrong. Colbrennan stood quickly. This is a smokescreen. He's had time to hide evidence, clean up, then come weekly, Garrett interrupted. Monthly. Surprise inspections whenever you want. They've got nothing to hide. The hall erupted in murmurs. Mayor Fletcher banged his gavel repeatedly. Order, order, please. Mrs. Brennan stood again. Mayor, I move that we accept Mr. Sawyer's offer. Let Sheriff Monroe conduct a thorough inspection of the property. If he finds nothing concerning, we put this matter to rest and stop. Persecuting a man for showing Christian charity. Seconded, another voice called. The older rancher who'd asked about freedom. Fletcher looked uncomfortable but nodded. All in favor of the inspection? A majority of hands rose. Not everyone. Cole Brennan and his supporters kept their hands firmly down, but enough to carry the motion. Motion passes, Fletcher declared. Sheriff Monroe, you'll conduct the inspection within the week and report findings at next month's meeting. Monroe's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. Fine. There's one more thing. Thomas surprised himself by speaking up without being prompted. Every eye swung back to him. Some of you think Mr. Sawyer must want something from us, that nobody helps without expecting payment. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You're right, he does want something. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cole Brennan leaned forward, satisfaction on his face. He wants us to grow up strong, Thomas continued, his voice gaining strength. Wants us to learn to survive without him someday. Wants us to become good men who'll help others the way he helped us. His eyes swept the crowd. That's what he gets from this, knowing he made a difference. And if that seems suspicious to you, if kindness without profit seems impossible, then maybe you should ask yourself why. The silence that followed was profound. Thomas saw shame on some faces, defiance on others, but mostly contemplation, as if his words had forced them to examine their own assumptions. An elderly woman in the back stood slowly, leaning on a cane. I knew Garrett's father, knew what happened when he died, how the town took their land from a grieving boy. Maybe that's why some of us can't believe Garrett would help orphans, because we didn't help him when he needed it. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through the assembly. Garrett's expression flickered, surprise, then something raw and quickly hidden. Mrs. Thornton, that was a long time ago. Doesn't make it right. The old woman's voice carried surprising strength. Doesn't change that we failed you, and now we're suspicious when you succeed where we failed. She looked around at her neighbors. Shame on us. The hall erupted again, some in agreement, some in protest. Mayor Fletcher banged his gavel frantically, finally restoring a semblance of order. I think we've heard enough for tonight, Fletcher said, his voice weary. Sheriff Monroe will conduct his inspection. Until then, I suggest we all reflect on what's been said here. He looked directly at Cole Brennan. And I remind everyone that accusations without evidence constitute slander, which is a legal matter. Cole's face darkened, but he held his tongue. This meeting is adjourned. Fletcher's gavel fell one last time. The crowd began dispersing, conversations breaking out immediately. Some people approached Garrett, Mrs. Brennan to offer support, the older rancher to shake his hand, others to speak quietly with the boys, but just as many left quickly, unwilling to engage. Cole Brennan stormed out with his supporters, shooting Garrett a look of pure hatred. William Porter approached Thomas hesitantly. That took guts. What you said up there. Just the truth, Thomas replied, exhausted suddenly. Still, not everyone could have done it. William glanced toward where his father had exited. Pa's not happy, but I think you got through to some people. Mrs. Thornton made her way to Garrett, her cane tapping on the wooden floor. Up close, Thomas could see tears on her weathered cheeks. You've become the man your father hoped you'd be, she said softly to the giant. He'd be proud. Garrett's throat worked. Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know. She patted his arm, having to reach up to do so, then nodded to the boys. You take care of these children, and you boys take care of him. Lord knows he needs family as much as you do. They made their way to the wagon through a gauntlet of stares and whispers. Thomas felt Benjamin trembling beside him, the adrenaline of confrontation fading into exhaustion. Samuel had fallen asleep against Garrett's shoulder, the giant carrying him as easily as a sack of grain. The ride home was quiet, each of them processing what had happened. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear, cold sky, indifferent to human drama. "Did we help?" Matthew finally asked, his voice small. "Or did we make things worse?" Garrett considered the question seriously. "Both, probably. We made some allies tonight. Mrs. Thornton, Mrs. Brennan, others. But we also made our opposition more entrenched. Cole Brennan won't forgive being challenged publicly. So nothing changed," Benjamin said bitterly. "Everything changed," Garrett corrected. "Before tonight, rumors controlled the narrative. Now the truth is out there. People have to choose which to believe, gossip or what they heard from your own mouths. That's more than we had before." Thomas watched the ranch appear in the distance, lamplight burning in the window they'd left lit. "Home, waiting. Whatever happens with the inspection," he said, "we told the truth. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Garrett replied. "Truth's the only weapon that never breaks." They reached the ranch and went through the motions of settling the horses, bringing supplies inside, preparing for bed. But the events of the evening hung over them. Exhaustion, mixed with the strange exhilaration of having fought and survived. As Thomas tucked Samuel into bed, the little boy stirred and whispered, "Are they going to take us away?" "No," Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. "Garrett won't let that happen. Promise?" Thomas thought about Garrett's fierce defense, about the giant's offer to open his entire life for inspection, about the steel in his voice when he declared them his boys. "Promise!" Downstairs he found Garrett sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. Thomas joined him silently. "You did well tonight," Garrett said eventually. "All of you. Took courage to stand up there. Learned from you." Thomas paused. "What Mrs. Thornton said about the town taking your land. I didn't know it was that bad. Ancient history." But Garrett's voice suggested it still carried weight. "Different time, different circumstances. Is that why you helped us? Because you knew what it felt like to lose everything?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe. Or maybe I helped because it was right, and the reasons don't matter as much as the action." He looked at Thomas directly. "Either way, I don't regret it. Whatever comes next, I don't regret bringing you boys home." "Neither do we," Thomas said softly. They sat together in companionable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying snow against the windows. But inside, warmth held. The battle wasn't over. Sheriff Monroe's inspection loomed. Cole Brennan's hostility remained. The town's judgment still hung in balance, but tonight they'd stood together, spoken truth, refused to be ashamed of the family they'd become, and somehow that felt like victory enough. Sheriff Monroe arrived 4 days later without warning. Thomas was helping Benjamin repair a fence when he spotted the riders approaching, Monroe and 2 deputies, their badges glinting in the weak winter sunlight. "Garrett!" Thomas called toward the barn. "Company!" The giant emerged, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He watched the riders approach with no visible emotion, then walked to meet them in the yard. Thomas and Benjamin hurried to his side. Monroe dismounted, his expression professionally blank. "Sawyer, we're here to conduct the inspection the town meeting authorized. Expected you sooner," Garrett replied calmly. "Thought you might try catching me unprepared." A flicker of annoyance crossed Monroe's face. "We're here now. You going to cooperate or make this difficult?" "I offered the inspection. Why would I make it difficult?" Garrett gestured toward the house. "Start wherever you like. Boys, fetch your brothers. Sheriff wants to see everything." The twins and Samuel appeared from the barn, their faces curious but wary. The 5 brothers clustered near Garrett as Monroe's deputies began their examination, one heading for the house, the other toward the outbuildings. Monroe himself stayed in the yard, studying the boys with uncomfortable intensity. "Any of you want to talk to me privately? Without Sawyer present?" "Why would we?" Benjamin's tone carried hostility that made Monroe's eyes narrow. Sometimes people are afraid to speak freely in front of those who control them. He doesn't control us, Thomas said firmly. He takes care of us. There's a difference. Monroe grunted noncommittally and followed the deputy into the house. Through the windows, Thomas could see them opening cupboards, checking rooms, examining everything with methodical thoroughness. "This is humiliating," Benjamin muttered. "Like we're criminals." "Let them look," Garrett said quietly. "Truth holds up under scrutiny. Lies don't." The inspection lasted 2 hours. The deputies examined every room, every outbuilding, even searched the barn loft. They checked the boys' sleeping arrangements, inspected their clothes, looked through Garrett's records of supplies and expenditures. Thomas watched Monroe's frustration grow as they found nothing. No signs of abuse, no evidence of impropriety, nothing to justify the suspicions. The house was clean but lived in. The boys' room showed signs of normal childhood, carved figures, drawings, books scattered on shelves. The clothes were mended but adequate. The larder was well stocked with food purchased legally from town merchants. Finally, Monroe gathered his deputies in the yard. "Found anything?" "Nothing, sir," the older deputy reported. "Place is actually better maintained than most family homes I've seen. Boys look healthy, well-fed. Their room's comfortable. No locks on doors except the main entrance." The younger deputy nodded agreement. "Checked the barn too. Animals are well cared for. No signs of anyone being kept against their will or mistreated." Monroe's jaw tightened. He turned to the boys, trying one last approach. "You boys sure you're happy here? Nobody's forcing you to stay?" "Nobody forced us to survive winter either, but we're grateful we did," Thomas replied. The other brothers nodded emphatically. Monroe exhaled sharply through his nose. "Fine. Sawyer, I'll report to the mayor that we found nothing concerning." The admission clearly pained him. "But understand, one complaint, one sign of trouble, and we're back. You're under scrutiny now." "I've been under scrutiny since I took them in," Garrett said evenly. "Haven't changed my behavior because of it." "Won't start now." Monroe mounted without another word, his deputies following suit. They rode out, leaving tracks in the mud where snow had begun melting in the afternoon sun. The moment they disappeared from sight, Samuel burst into tears, the stress he'd been holding finally releasing. Garrett scooped him up instantly, the boy's small body shaking with sobs against the giant's shoulder. "It's over, little man. They're gone. You're safe." "They were mean," Samuel hiccuped, "looking through our things. Like we did something bad, I know. But they didn't find anything, because there's nothing bad to find." Garrett's hand rubbed soothing circles on Samuel's back. "Sometimes the world demands proof of goodness. We just gave it to them." Benjamin kicked at the dirt, his face flushed with residual anger. "It's not fair. Why do we have to prove we deserve to be here?" "Because the world's not fair," Garrett said simply. "Never has been. Question is, do we let unfairness break us, or do we keep standing?" "Keep standing," Benjamin muttered, though his frustration remained evident. That evening brought unexpected visitors. Mrs. Brennan's wagon appeared just before sunset. The elderly woman, accompanied by 2 other ladies, Thomas recognized from town. Garrett tensed slightly until Mrs. Brennan called out cheerfully, "Don't worry, Garrett. We come as friends, not inquisitors." She climbed down with surprising spryness for her age, the other women following with baskets. "Heard Monroe was out here today. Figured you boys might appreciate some home cooking after that ordeal." The baskets contained pies, apple, cherry, and pumpkin, still warm from baking. The smell made Thomas's mouth water instantly. "Mrs. Brennan, you didn't have to," Garrett began. "Nonsense. It's what neighbors do." She looked at the boys with genuine warmth. "Besides, I wanted to see for myself that you're all doing well. Not because I doubted, but because I care." The other women introduced themselves, Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, and Miss Emily Cartwright, the schoolteacher. Both regarded the boys with friendly curiosity rather than suspicion. "Sheriff Monroe stopped by my store after leaving here," Mrs. Brennan said, as they all moved inside. "Looked like he'd swallowed vinegar. Wouldn't say much, but his deputy told me they found nothing amiss." "Nothing at all, because there's nothing to find," Garrett said, setting pie on the table. "But I appreciate you believing that without needing an inspection." Miss Cartwright, a young woman perhaps 25, spoke up. "Mr. Sawyer, I've been thinking. These boys should be attending school, getting proper education with other children their age." Thomas felt his brothers tense. School meant town, meant facing the children of people like Cole Brennan. Garrett seemed to sense their apprehension. "I've been teaching them at home. They're progressing well. I don't doubt your abilities," Miss Cartwright said quickly. "But education isn't just about books. It's about socialization, learning to navigate relationships with peers." "They need that too," Mrs. Patterson nodded. "My husband and I discussed it. We'd be willing to let the boys stay at the boarding house during the week if the ranch is too far for daily travel. No charge, just our contribution to their welfare." The offer was generous, but Thomas saw Garrett's jaw tighten fractionally. The giant's protective instincts warred with understanding the women's point. "I appreciate the offer," Garrett said carefully. "But these boys have been through enough upheaval. Separating them from home during the week seems cruel. What if we came to you?" Miss Cartwright proposed. "I could ride out 3 days a week, teach all 5 together. It wouldn't be full schooling, but it would supplement your lessons and provide an outside perspective." Garrett considered this, then looked at the boys. "What do you think?" Thomas was surprised at being consulted. He glanced at his brothers. Benjamin looked intrigued, the twins excited, Samuel uncertain. "It might be good," Thomas said slowly. "Learning from someone besides you. Not because you're not good," he added quickly, "but because different teachers have different knowledge. I know history and literature quite well," Miss Cartwright offered. "And I could assess their academic levels, help fill any gaps." Garrett studied her face, seeming to measure her sincerity. Finally he nodded. 3 days a week, trial basis. But the moment any of these boys feels uncomfortable or unwelcome, it stops." Agreed," Miss Cartwright smiled warmly. "I think this will be wonderful for all of them." The women stayed for supper, bringing life and laughter into the house in a way Thomas hadn't experienced since his mother died. Mrs. Brennan told stories about Garrett as a young man, embarrassing him thoroughly. Mrs. Patterson shared gossip from town, careful to avoid the nastier rumors, focusing instead on humorous incidents and community news. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Brennan pulled Garrett aside. Thomas, clearing dishes, overheard their conversation. "Cole Brennan's not done," she warned quietly. "Monroe's report will slow him down, but it won't stop him. He's got pride and stubbornness in equal measure." "I know," Garrett replied. "I'm prepared. You can't fight the whole town alone. I'm not alone anymore." Garrett glanced toward where the boys were showing Mrs. Patterson a carving Benjamin had made. "That makes all the difference," Mrs. Brennan patted his arm. "You're a good man, Garrett Sawyer. Don't let them convince you otherwise." After the women left, the house felt warmer somehow, as if their kindness had literally heated the air. The boys devoured pie while Garrett built up the fire, and for a few hours, the threats and tensions faded into background noise. Miss Cartwright arrived 3 days later on a sturdy mare, saddlebags full of books and slates for writing. She was professional but warm, quickly assessing each boy's academic level with questions that felt more like conversation than testing. "Thomas, you read at a high level. Probably 8th or 9th grade equivalent," she announced. "Benjamin, you're strong in mathematics but need work on grammar. Daniel and Matthew, your reading is coming along nicely, though spelling needs practice. And Samuel," she smiled at the smallest boy, "you're very bright for your age. You'll catch up to your brothers in no time." The lessons were different from Garrett's, more structured with assignments and deadlines. But Miss Cartwright made learning engaging, using stories and examples that captured even the twins' short attention spans. Garrett observed the first few sessions from a respectful distance, evaluating her methods. Thomas caught him nodding approval when Miss Cartwright praised Benjamin's solution to a complex problem, saw satisfaction when she patiently helped Samuel sound out difficult words. After the 3rd lesson, as Miss Cartwright prepared to leave, she spoke privately with Garrett while the boys did their evening chores. "They're remarkable children," she said. "Thomas has natural leadership. Benjamin's analytical. The twins are creative. And Samuel's empathy is extraordinary. She paused. You've done well with them, Mr. Sawyer. Whatever the town says, these boys are thriving. They're survivors, Garrett replied. I just gave them space to recover. You gave them more than space. You gave them family. Miss Cartwright mounted her horse. The town will see it eventually. The good people already do. Her words proved partially prophetic. Over the following weeks, more supportive visitors appeared. The older rancher from the town meeting, bringing a calf he claimed was extra, but clearly intended as a gift. A farmer's wife with jars of preserves. Even William Porter stopped by once, bringing carved animals he'd made for Samuel, but support came with reminders of opposition. Thomas found their fence cut one morning, requiring hours to repair. Someone spread rumors that Garrett was working the boys like slaves, easily disproven, but requiring energy to refute. And Cole Brennan made a point of staring whenever they came to town, his presence a constant threat. Through it all, the boys grew stronger. Not just physically, though regular food and safety had restored their health, but in confidence. Benjamin smiled more. The twins' laughter filled the house. Samuel stopped having nightmares. Even Thomas felt the constant tension he'd carried since his parents' death begin to ease. One evening in early March, with the worst of winter finally breaking, Garrett gathered them in the great room for an announcement. Spring's coming. That means real ranch work begins soon. Calving, planting, fence maintenance, everything that keeps this place running. He looked at each boy. I want you involved. Not as free labor, he added quickly, seeing Thomas's expression. As family learning the family business. You'll get paid wages like any hand, saved for your futures. But more important, you'll learn skills that'll serve you your whole lives. We're really staying? Matthew asked, as if still unable to believe it fully. You're really staying, Garrett confirmed. This is your home. These skills are your inheritance. Same as the land will be someday. The casual mention of inheritance, of a future so permanent, it included ownership, stunned them all into silence. You mean? Thomas's voice caught. You'd leave us the ranch? Who else would I leave it to? Garrett's tone suggested this was obvious. I've got no other family. You're it. Might as well ensure you know how to run it when the time comes. Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. Nobody's ever wanted us permanent before. Then they were fools. Garrett's voice was gruff but gentle. You're mine now, permanently. Legal papers and everything, once we get around to it. You're Garrett's, in fact, if not yet in name. The magnitude of what he was offering, not just home, but future, inheritance, a name that meant belonging, overwhelmed Thomas. His brothers seemed equally struck. Why? Samuel asked in his small voice. Why do you want us so much? Garrett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried emotion rarely displayed. Because you needed me. And because, he paused, choosing words carefully, I needed you too. Didn't know it until I found you on that road. But I'd been alone too long. This house was empty. Now it's full. That's worth more than all the suspicion and gossip combined. He cleared his throat, returning to his usual pragmatic tone. Now enough sentiment. Tomorrow we start spring planning. Thomas, you'll learn bookkeeping. Benjamin, animal husbandry. Twins, you'll help with equipment maintenance. Samuel, you're on egg collection and garden planning with me. The boys nodded, their faces showing determination mixed with gratitude. As they dispersed to prepare for bed, Thomas lingered. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. For saving us. For keeping us. For making us family. Garrett's massive hand came to rest on his shoulder, that familiar gesture of protection and trust. You made yourselves family, son. I just recognized it. That night, Thomas lay awake thinking about transformation, about 5 starving boys on a frozen road who'd become sons with futures, about a lonely giant who'd become a father, about how 4 simple words, "You're coming with me," had changed everything. Outside, the last snows of winter melted into earth preparing for spring. Inside, a family slept peacefully, secure in belonging. The battle for acceptance would continue. Cole Brennan's hostility wouldn't vanish. The town's judgment would linger, but they'd won something more important than approval. They'd won against each other. And that Thomas knew as sleep finally claimed him was the only victory that truly mattered. Spring arrived with sudden violence. A late storm struck in mid-April, catching ranchers unprepared. Garrett had been in the north pasture, checking new calves, when the sky turned black and unleashed fury. Thomas saw it from the barn, wind that bent trees horizontal, hail that shattered like gunfire against the roof. "Benjamin, get the animals inside. Twins, help him. Samuel, stay with me." They worked frantically, driving cattle into shelters, securing horses, battening down everything that could fly. But Garrett wasn't back, and the storm showed no mercy. An hour passed. Then two. The storm raged without pause, visibility dropping to nothing. Thomas paced the barn, his stomach churning with fear that felt too familiar, the helplessness of watching someone disappear into dangerous weather. "We have to go after him," he told Benjamin. "In this, we die before finding him. He could be hurt, frozen. We can't just wait." Benjamin gripped his arm. "Tommy, he made us promise. If anything happened, we stay safe. We don't risk ourselves. I don't care what I promised." Thomas's voice cracked. "I won't lose another father." The words hung between them, raw and true. Benjamin's expression shifted from argument to understanding. "Then we go smart," he said firmly. "Rope tied between us. Stay in sight of the house. Search in a grid pattern. The moment visibility gets worse, we come back." They prepared quickly, heavy coats, rope linking them together, lanterns though daylight remained. The twins wanted to help, but Thomas ordered them to stay with Samuel, keep the fire going, watch for their return. The storm swallowed them the moment they stepped outside. Wind tore at their clothes, hail stung exposed skin like hornets. Thomas led with Benjamin behind, both of them scanning desperately for any sign of Garrett or his horse. They found him 30 yards from the house, collapsed near the fence line. His horse stood over him, shielding him from the worst of the hail. Blood matted Garrett's hair where something, a falling branch, flying debris, had struck him. "Garrett!" Thomas dropped beside him, terror flooding through. The giant's eyes were closed, his massive frame utterly still. Benjamin pressed fingers to Garrett's neck. "He's alive! Pulse is strong." Between them, they managed to get the semi-conscious giant upright, supporting his weight, though it nearly crushed them. Step by agonizing step, they dragged him toward the house, the horse following faithfully. The twins had the door open, faces white with fear. Together, all of them managed to get Garrett inside and onto his bed. Thomas examined the head wound with shaking hands, deep but not fatal, already clotting. "Water," he ordered. "Blankets. Ben, stoke the fire higher." For hours, Thomas tended Garrett the way the giant had once tended him, cleaning the wound, checking for fever, monitoring breathing. His brothers hovered nearby, Samuel clutching Garrett's hand and refusing to let go. Near midnight, Garrett's eyes finally opened. He tried to sit up, groaned, and fell back. "Easy," Thomas said, his voice rough with relief. "You took a bad hit to the head." Garrett's gaze moved slowly around the room, taking in 5 worried faces surrounding him. "Storm?" "Passed. You've been out for hours." Thomas helped him drink water. "What happened?" "Branch came down. Hit me before I saw it." Garrett winced, touching his head gingerly. "Horse brought me back?" "Close enough." "We found you by the fence," Thomas paused. "You told us never to risk ourselves in storms." "We did it anyway." He expected anger. Instead, Garrett's expression softened into something Thomas had never quite seen before, pure paternal pride mixed with love. "Because you're stubborn and brave and exactly the kind of men I hoped you'd become." Garrett's massive hand found Thomas's shoulder. "Thank you for not listening." Over the following days, roles reversed. The boys managed the ranch while Garrett recovered, proving they'd absorbed his teachings. Thomas handled the books and planning. Benjamin oversaw the animals with competence beyond his years. The twins maintained equipment. Even Samuel contributed, taking on cooking with surprising skill. Garrett watched from his chair by the fire, offering guidance but letting them work. Thomas caught him smiling sometimes, seeing them function as a unit, as a family that could survive even without him. The injury brought unexpected consequences. Word spread through town. Garrett Sawyer had been hurt, and 5 orphan boys were running his ranch alone. Some waited for failure, for proof the arrangement had been foolish. Instead, the ranch thrived. Mrs. Brennan visited, reporting with satisfaction that even Cole Brennan had gone quiet, unable to maintain his accusations in the face of such obvious competence and devotion. "Those boys saved your life," she told Garrett. "Risked their own to bring you home. People see that. They understand now what you've built here." When Garrett finally returned to full health 3 weeks later, he called a family meeting. The boys gathered, curious and slightly nervous. "I've been thinking," Garrett began, "about making things official. Legal adoption papers, changing your names to Sawyer if you want. Making permanent what we already know is true. We'd be real brothers?" Matthew asked. "Legally?" "Legally and every other way." Garrett looked at Thomas. "You'd be Thomas Sawyer. All of you would carry the name, have legal claim to this ranch, be recognized as family under law." Thomas felt emotion swell in his chest. "What about our birth names? Our parents? Keep them as middle names if you want. Honor where you came from while claiming where you belong now." Garrett's voice gentled. "Your parents gave you life and love. I'm just giving you a future. Both can be true." One by one, the boys agreed. Even Benjamin, who'd been most resistant to trust, nodded with tears streaming down his face. The legal proceedings took months, requiring testimony and verification. Judge Harrison, a fair man despite town pressures, interviewed each boy separately. Thomas told him everything: the starvation, the rescue, the kindness that had rebuilt their lives. "You understand this is permanent?" the judge asked. Garrett Sawyer would have all legal rights and responsibilities of a father. "He already does, sir. We're just making the paperwork match reality." The adoption was finalized in August, a small ceremony in the judge's chambers. When they emerged, they were officially the Sawyer family: Garrett, Thomas, Benjamin, Daniel, Matthew, and Samuel. That evening, the entire supportive contingent of Blackwater Creek gathered at the ranch for celebration. Mrs. Brennan brought enough food to feed an army. Miss Cartwright presented each boy with leather-bound journals for recording their new life. The old rancher who'd supported them gave Garrett a handshake and a gruff, "About time." Even William Porter appeared, his father notably absent, bringing his congratulations and a hand-carved sign reading "The Sawyer Ranch, established 1887. As the sun set and guests departed, the 6 Sawyers sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Samuel dozed against Garrett's side. The twins played a quiet game of checkers. Benjamin whittled contentedly. Thomas simply breathed, absorbing peace he'd once thought impossible. "You know what tomorrow is?" Garrett asked suddenly. Thomas calculated. 9 months since you found us? 9 months since 5 boys changed my life." Garrett's voice carried weight. "I've been thinking about that moment, seeing you on that road. Easiest decision I ever made, stopping to help. And the best. We're the ones who got the better deal," Thomas said softly. "No." Garrett shook his head. "Before you came, I was alive but not living, going through motions in an empty house. You gave me purpose, gave me family. That's worth more than I can say." Benjamin looked up from his whittling. "So we saved each other." "Exactly right." Garrett's smile was genuine and warm. "We saved each other." In town, Cole Brennan would continue his resentment, though increasingly isolated. Sheriff Monroe would watch them with lingering suspicion that gradually faded. Some townspeople would never fully approve, but the Sawyer family didn't need universal approval. They had each other, they had their land, and they had the unshakable foundation of love proven through fire. Years would pass. The boys would grow into men, Thomas taking over much of the ranch management, Benjamin becoming a renowned horse breeder, the twins opening a successful equipment business, Samuel following Miss Cartwright's path into teaching. Garrett would age, but remain their anchor, the giant whose 4 simple words had rewritten their destinies. But on this night, with stars overhead and family surrounding him, Thomas felt complete. The boy who'd nearly frozen to death had become a man with purpose. The brothers who'd lost everything had gained a future, and the lonely giant had become the father he was always meant to be. You're coming with me. 4 words. A choice made in a moment, a lifetime of consequences. Thomas looked at his father, because that's what Garrett was now, legally and in every way that mattered, and felt gratitude beyond expression. "Thank you," he said simply, "for stopping, for seeing us, for giving us home." Garrett's massive hand rested on his shoulder one more time, that gesture of protection and trust and love. "Thank you for letting me." The wind whispered through the pines. The ranch settled into peaceful night sounds. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady, and the Sawyer family, forged from desperation and kindness, from loss and second chances, sat together in the home they'd built, not from timber and stone alone, but from courage, trust, and the kind of love that transforms strangers into family and houses into forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.